Okay, well, this is going to be the first reaction on this channel, so here we go. Nigel Farage getting worried, apparently.
Well, JD Vance warned us the other week about freedom of speech. By that he meant censorship. But there's another thing that happened last night that makes me worry about freedom of speech and about the whole democratic process. It was an event that I was doing in Camborne in Cornwall last night, where a group called Antifa turned up. Now, they have their origins in America, and they're more than happy to resort to violence. Have a quick look at some of the Antifa protesters from last night.
Protect the fascists! Who protect the fascists? Shame on you! Shame on you! Go away! Move back! You're embarrassed! Shame on you!
So let's be clear, these were masked protesters. Members of the public were expected to walk through them. Of course, what they were looking for was members of the public to react. One member of the public who was there had his tooth knocked out, but no arrests were made. And no attempt was made by Devon and Cornwall police to separate protesters out. And prior to the event, they'd made scores of phone calls to the venue saying, cancel the event or there will be violence on your premises. And I've got to tell you something. I'm a great believer in political protest. You can stand there and shout, maybe chuck the odd egg. All right, just about live with that. I think what happened last night was closer to political terrorism and quite extraordinary that Zoe Fox, Councillor Zoe Fox was there, and she was the Labour mayor of Camborne up until last year. I have written to the Home Secretary, and I will be actually writing to the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police complaining about their conduct.
Yeah, like all these things, the same thing happened. This happened in America with Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, all these people. And at the end of the day, the police usually have to bow down and do something about it. And it's eventually going to be the case in this country that the same thing's going to happen. At the minute, they don't want to touch them, but eventually Big Nige here is probably going to win, and the police will have to do something, even begrudgingly, if the police don't agree with like whatever the event's to do with as well. But yeah, they'll have to just get on with it and do their job, because that's what they're meant to be there for. They're meant to be there to protect, not just let everybody do whatever the hell they want. It's ridiculous, but anyway, keep going.
You've seen loads of political protests over the years. I just don't think people with masks should be able to crowd round the entrance.
No.
At what is a democratic event.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, actually, you couldn't see it very well on that clip, but the clip I looked at earlier where they were masked, they looked very intimidating.
I mean, if you're wearing a mask and you're doing it, it's like kind of... I mean, you obviously don't want to get caught, so you're obviously going to be doing something that you maybe shouldn't be doing. Otherwise, why cover your face? Like...
Yeah. Nobody should be intimidated in attending a political event, a public event. If the police and the organisers, Reform presumably, have been in touch and liaised, as you would always have to do for this sort of thing. How many people do you expect? Have you got adequate car parking, etc., etc.? But if the venue had had warnings of violence, I'm surprised that the police seem to think, oh, well, perhaps they don't mean it.
Well, it's this response to policing that we act when there's a problem, rather than being preventative. And they could have just read online and have known what was going to happen.
Well, yes, I think there will have been people going to that, as there would be to any political party meeting, who might have gone, oh, I'm not going to go through that.
Well, 100 people who'd bought tickets turned around and left.
I'm not a member of your party, Nigel, obviously, but
I expect you to be.
Okay, but everybody has got the right to do that, and we're all used to it. And I've been to a gazillion party conferences where they're noisy and not very pleasant, but not that level of intimidation to members of the public in a village hall, I presume.
This is it was a centre with a gymnasium, swimming pool. There were actually young kids coming in and out.
So it's not. What I mean is, it's not a purpose-built conference centre like you'd get at the Labour or Tory.
No, I mean, my concern.
That's wild if that's happening and the police are not doing anything about it, and they're just standing there when there's kids and that knocking talking about, like, that's crazy, man. It's crazy that the police are just sitting on this. It's nuts.
And here is that if these people are allowed to continue to behave like this, and let's hope the Home Secretary does. I mean, I think Antifa should be a banned organisation, frankly, because of the fact they've used violence so repeatedly, particularly all over America. But otherwise, how do we conduct elections? How do we have proper debate? I think it's quite concerning.
We have in this country...
The irony of it as well, they call themselves the anti-fascists when actually they want to try and stop speech. Like, it's crazy. It's just, the irony is just ridiculous.
Serious, and law enforcement have a serious blind spot when it comes to far-left extremism. As you say, Antifa, particularly in the United States, are a violent leftist extremist organisation. The journalist Andy No, who's a very good friend of mine, they actually tried to kill him for reporting on their activities. So, you know, this is not something that we can tolerate in the short term without it escalating in the long term. And we've seen this with other types of protests over the last 5 years, that when you give them an inch, it keeps going and going and going until it's the destruction of property, vandalism, and eventually attacking people.
And no arrests. No arrests.
And when you see the way that the police protest other protests where they're so heavy-handed, and this is straightforward democratic interference. And what's remarkable is that, you know, for all of the talk in Parliament, particularly in the Labour Party, of how it's important for everybody to you know, be nice to one another, and they would be very quick to jump on incitement if it were from a right-wing party towards somebody in the Labour Party. But when an MP like Zara Sultana is putting up posters of views that are really quite sort of demonic-looking, they have nothing to say about that.
No.
And so, really, if the Labour Party, you mentioned JD Vance's speech and him talking about how the greatest threat to us is the loss of our fundamental values.
Yeah, man, JD Vance absolutely raked everybody. What an embarrassment to the the British Parliament, having JD Vance absolutely rake them, talking about censorship. That's right, we're losing it. It's crazy. And I live in Scotland, and, you know, censorship in Scotland's getting pretty effective. Well, JD Vance mentioned that too. Like, it's crazy.
Country, well, diplomatically in his relationship with Donald Trump, if Keir Starmer doesn't take things like this seriously, freedom of speech, the democratic process, then that is not going to be very good for our relationship with America in the long term.
No,
They are banning books in America, Emma.
What are they banning?
They're banning books in libraries, aren't they? Children's books.
Oh,
man, they're at this pish again. They're banning books that have got, like, soft... we're on YouTube, so pretty graphic books to do with things that kids shouldn't really be doing. Like, it's nonsense. The fact that she's just said that is absolutely laughable. But here we go. I think Nigel's just about to maybe see what it is.
they're taking some children's books out of public libraries. They're not banning them. They're banning
them from libraries.
They're not burning them or banning them, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
A spokesman for Devon and Cornwall Police said police were aware of a political event at the Carnbury Leisure Centre in Poole, Cornwall. Officers attended in order to ensure the safety of those present and prevent any potential breach of the peace. Well, sorry.
Didn't it just say somebody got their tooth knocked out?
There were reports of minor issues that occurred between protesters and counter-protesters, which were brought under control by officers. No arrests were made. What absolute cobblers.
Yeah.
There were no counter-protesters. These were delegates coming to a conference who'd paid money to be there. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. The What the Farage moment of the day is now Winston Churchill portraits are being removed from Parliament buildings. And that over the last couple of years goes along with William Gladstone, Oliver Cromwell, Lord Liverpool, Duke of Wellington, William Wilberforce, Lord Salisbury, John Milton, Charles I, and Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Do Labour hate our history that much?
26,000 works of art within the parliamentary estate that anybody can choose to have, and many of them ring the changes. I mean, I don't know what your office accommodation is like, but...
Poor.
Okay. Well, maybe we could have a tiny picture. We'll look for a Holbein.
Yeah.
But you could, they are constantly churned round. Under the previous government, there was a review, I think it was 2022, of the sort of works of art that were being displayed in Parliament and public buildings, because a lot of these are areas where the public go as well.
Yeah, Portcullis House particularly.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And Westminster Hall as well. And so there was a review, an audit, I think they called it, of people or symbols, if you like, of slavery, or things that we might not be comfortable with anymore.
Wow.
But I think to the idea that, they've taken down Churchill and they've put him in a bunker somewhere, they're just changing things
Well, there is,
around.
I mean, it's sort of Diane Abbott in and Churchill out, really, isn't it? Or am I being unfair?
You're not being unfair. I mean, it's not arbitrary either. The portraits that they've been removing are portraits that were on that list, and many of them were included on that list for, their links to slavery for very tenuous reasons, including, for some reason, William Wilberforce, who spearheaded the abolition of slavery.
Bizarre.
And the thing about Churchill is actually that this is coming from politically motivated, ideologically motivated campaign of defamation against a national hero. One of the main things that often gets brought up against him is the Bengal famine, which has been repeatedly myth-busted and shown to be completely factually false by some of our most eminent historians, including Churchill's biographer Andrew Roberts.
I didn't know that.
I think what we're seeing with the removal of these portraits is very much in line with what we saw during the campaign.
And how funny.
There is a large statue of Churchill.
There is
Which
for now.
keeps
For
getting
now.
graffitied
For now.
and attacked.
Well, it's Churchill out in Parliament, but Churchill into the Oval Office.
Very good. I didn't know that had been disproven. I thought they were still, that was a standard. I was like, well, fair enough, but yeah, if that's been disproven, then they're really going to struggle with cancelling Churchill. Well, they're going to cancel him anyway by the sounds of it. But crazy. It's mental that we're starting to have issues with Antifa in the UK. We don't need that. And ironically, they call everybody else fascists, like when they are actually the fascists. And well, we're starting to lose free speech in the UK slowly but surely, and that's what fascism usually does. They want to silence political opponents, and Keir Starmer is. It's obvious with Keir Starmer because he's always talking about the alt-right and how the right and all this is cancerous and toxic to the UK, and that kind of semantics in itself is self-explanatory about how he wants to cancel his political opponents. So there we go. That's UK now, folks.